We're coming to you live from my quarantine death chamber, friends. We're in lockdown here in Austria. I'm taking this time to be productive and do some writing. And so the topic of today's conversation is Zen and creativity. One of the reasons that I got into Zen was because I was totally stuck as a writer and totally stuck creatively. Like, I wanted to make things out of words, but I was trapped by my ambition to produce within the brutal realities of the literary marketplace. Like, the more I tried to be a successful writer, the worse and worse my stuff got. In my experience, you can't force creativity. You know, it's a natural process that has its own life. And the harder you try and make it happen, the more it's just going to elude you. So here's the trick. You have to do the work. You really have to try. But the result is totally out of your control. So I never went to writing school or got an MFA or anything like that, but during a brief period of time in my life, the stars aligned and I got to spend some time with Leonard Cohen. And this was at the end of his career as one of the great singer, songwriter, poets of our time. And as far as I could see, he didn't have any ego around the creative process. And he was able to impart some insights about that process to me. So at the end of my teacher's life, Leonard would come and help take care of him. And Leonard's assistant and Roshi's assistant would go out and go to the Korean spa or do some shopping or something. And my teacher would take a nap, and Leonard and I would brew some green tea, and we would just talk. And a lot of times, these talks came around to writing. One day we were talking about poetry, and Leonard said something to the effect of, people think that poetry is this great, exalted process, but really, you're just on your knees, fitting the pipes together smoothly, just making sure that the human waste flows and doesn't spill everywhere. One of the big lessons that Leonard imparted to me through all these conversations, he had seen it all at this point. And his attitude seemed to be that your job as a plumber or a monk doing koan practice or a rabbi or a priest saying prayers, it's all the same. You bring your best intentions and all your skills to the project, leave your ego at the door, give yourself completely to the work, just lose yourself in it, and let the chips fall where they may. I like this idea, this notion of creativity, that it's an egoless process, similar to answering a koan or surrendering completely to prayer. It's bigger than you and it's outside of yourself. It seems really important to, as much as possible, remove your ego from the creative process. Ego wants answers because it's afraid to fail. And it's also lazy. It doesn't want to do the work. It wants to already have done the work and then to reap all the benefits. And the absolute last thing the ego seems to want, at least my ego, is to do all that work, to sit down and give yourself completely to a creative project, produce something, and then the world flat out rejects it. Like, that hurts. And I think this fact is why so many of us ultimately wind up just shutting down creatively in life. But, you know, that's a mistake. I think it's good to think about the creative process as a path. You know, it's similar to the spiritual path. You never know where it's going to take you, but each mistake leads you closer to where you were meant to be and exactly where you need to go. My failure years ago in the literary marketplace, and then as a screenwriter and a poet and a stand-up comic and a playwright and all the other things I tried, all those failures ultimately led to my Zen path, which then led to my 2 books, Zen Confidential and Single White Monk, which I was able to finally write. Then last year, I wrote a couple short stories, and I really loved these short stories. I really believed in them, and I thought they were great. And I papered the literary world with submissions of these 2 short stories, and all the submissions came back as rejections. And I mean, I was pretty devastated, but I had to do some soul searching. I had to dig deep. I didn't want to stop creating. And that led me here to YouTube, to making these videos. And it led me to Patreon, where I started posting essays. And I started getting people to sign up, people I would have never been connected with, people I never would have met, people that never would have read what I'm writing. My failures to publish those 2 short stories led to this flourishing on Patreon. I didn't give up just because the world said no. I didn't step off the path. I licked my wounds, and then I got right back on the same path, and I just headed in a new direction. About halfway through my first winter seichu, or training season at the monastery, I began to notice a pattern in how I was failing my koans. But the pattern was not in anything I was doing. The pattern was in my teacher and how he was responding to me. So I would go into the Sanzen room and I would give my koan. And then, after seeing the disappointment on my teacher's face, I'd sit back and he would teach me. He would instruct. And then our koan practice came to an end. And at the end of every Sanzen with my teacher, he would say the same thing. He would say, just try. Just try. So after about probably the 40th time he said this to me, I went back to my cushion and I decided to sit with it. What does he mean by just try? Over and over and over, I sat with those 2 words, just try. I sat with those 2 words like they were the koan itself. What does that mean? Just try. And then one day it occurred to me, maybe those 2 words are the answer. Just try. Maybe trying to answer the koan is the answer to the koan. So can you do that? Can you just try with all your heart, with all your mind, with every fiber of your being? Can you just try with no attachment to an outcome? With no fear of failure or hope for success? What would that mean? What would that look like? What would that feel like? What if you completely forgot yourself and just tried? Spiritual freedom and true creativity is born from a willingness to hurl yourself into the void and just try. You may not answer the koan and you may not create a work of art, but I guarantee you something new will be born. And that's your only job, to do the work and then let the work speak for itself. I hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope you get something out of it. I was inspired to write it because I was working on an essay for Patreon about some time that I spent with Leonard Cohen at the monastery, and a really intense evening that we had where he gave me a lot of advice that I later was able to process and and use creatively. If you want to read that essay, if you like what you see here, you can go to Patreon. The link is beep. This stuff is all offered for free on YouTube, but any support you can offer is great. And thanks for tuning in.